The room was dark in that specific way old dormitory rooms are dark. Not quite black, the ambient light from the parking lot coming in around the edges of the curtains, enough to see the outlines of things, but not the details. Riley was across the room, barefoot, and I don't know exactly when she had dropped from the top bunk because I hadn't heard her. She's a sprinter. She moves like she's already mid-race, even when she's standing completely still. Jessica was on the floor beside her bed, where I'd shoved her 2 minutes earlier, and she hadn't asked me why, and I hadn't told her. The three of us were not breathing. That's not a figure of speech. We were holding our breath the way you do when breathing feels like a decision that will give something away. The door was opening. Madison stepped into the room. She was wearing her oversized university hoodie, the heather gray one with the cracked letters across the chest, the one she'd had since freshman year. She was holding a plastic container in both hands, clear lid, red inside, catching the parking lot light. Watermelon cut into neat triangles, pressed together, glistening. She was smiling. Not nervous smiling, not confused smiling. The wide, uncomplicated smile of someone who has just done a nice thing and is glad about it. The smile of someone who has absolutely no idea why the room is the temperature it is right now. My hands were shaking. I realized this because the calculus textbook I'd been holding over my head for the last 45 seconds was vibrating slightly. It was a big textbook, 8th edition, probably 3 pounds, maybe more. I was lowering it now, slowly, arms starting to ache, and running through the checklist I had assembled over the last 72 hours without realizing I was assembling it. Eyes. I looked at her eyes. The checklist always starts with eyes, both of them. Tracking. They moved from me to Jessica on the floor to Riley against the far wall. And they did this in sequence, taking in each thing separately, registering the wrongness of each arrangement. Not moving in the flat, unfocused way they had moved 3 nights ago when she had been standing over my bed at 2 a.m. with a kitchen knife held above her head. Awake. Madison was awake. She was responding to her name. Riley had said it, sharp and quiet, and Madison had turned toward the sound immediately. No lag, no delay. She was looking at the object in her own hands, and she found it strange that she was holding it here, in this room, at this hour. She was not confused about what it was. She was confused about what it meant. Awake. The textbook was all the way down now, hanging at my side. My arms didn't know what to do after that, so I just held it there. Madison looked at us again. Really looked this time. Jessica still on the floor, one hand braced behind her, not yet standing. Riley with her back 3 inches from the wall, in the exact posture she holds at the starting blocks. Me, with a calculus book held at hip height, like I was about to lunge into a pool. The 3 of us arranged in a triangle of barely controlled panic around nothing, around emptiness, around the place in the center of the room where nobody was standing. Madison's face did a thing I won't ever fully describe. Something collapsed in it. The smile went first, and what replaced it was not fear or anger. It was the specific expression of someone who understands that something has happened without knowing what it is, and who can see in the faces of the people in front of her that it involves her somehow, and who does not yet know how to hold that. She set the container down. She set it on the floor very carefully, like it was fragile, like she was giving herself something to do while the rest of her caught up. Then she put both hands over her mouth. Nobody said anything. The parking lot light came in around the curtains. The building hummed the way old buildings hum at 2 a.m. The elevator somewhere below us, the radiator doing its thing, the 3rd floor hallway settling. The watermelon sat on the floor between all of us, red and wet and completely out of context. Madison pressed her hands harder over her mouth. Riley looked at me. I looked at the watermelon. Let me go back 3 days. Because none of this makes sense without the knife. 3 nights before the watermelon, I woke up because something was wrong with the air in the room. I know how that sounds. There isn't a better way to say it. The room felt different the way rooms feel different when the temperature has shifted, or when a window has opened, except neither of those things had happened. I lay there for a moment, doing the half-asleep thing where you're trying to determine whether the wrongness that woke you up is real or residue from a dream. Then I heard Madison's breathing. She was in the bottom bunk across from mine. She'd been in the bottom bunk since September, 4 months, long enough that I knew the rhythm of her sleeping better than I knew my own. This was not that rhythm. I turned over. She was standing beside my bed. That is not a sentence I enjoy writing, even now. She was standing beside my bed in the dark, with her eyes open and her arms raised above her head, and she was holding a kitchen knife. The small one from the makeshift kitchen kit we shared. Paring knife, 8-inch chefs. This one, the medium one that we used for everything. I didn't scream. I don't know why. Maybe because the sound was trying to come up and couldn't find the way out. Maybe because some part of me was running the checklist already, even then, without knowing I was doing it. Her eyes. Open. But not. The irises were visible. She was facing me, but there was something absent behind them. The tracking was off. She wasn't looking at me the way you look at a person. She was looking at the space above me. The knife was above her head, both hands on the handle, angled slightly, and she was not moving. And she was breathing in this slow, deliberate way that had nothing to do with the rhythm I knew. I said her name. Nothing. I said it again, louder. Riley woke up. She'd moved to the top bunk after Jessica joined us in October. We'd rearranged. And I heard her sit up fast and then go completely still, the way she goes still when she's processing a situation before she decides what to do about it. I said Madison's name a third time, louder still, and I sat up slowly in the bunk, and I reached out and I touched her shoulder. She blinked. The knife went down. Both arms just dropped, like strings had been cut. She looked at the knife in her hands, then at me, then at the knife again. "Do you have a history of this?" Riley asked from the top bunk. Her voice was the voice of someone who is very frightened and is refusing to let that be audible. Madison stared at the knife. Riley said, "Sleepwalking," she said. "Do you have a history of sleepwalking?" And Madison said very quietly, standing there holding the knife, "I used to. When I was a kid. My mom said I grew out of it. She was put on a new medication 4 weeks ago. I know this now, I didn't know it then. She'd been having trouble sleeping. The adjustment to sophomore year, a difficult breakup in October, the general pressure of a schedule she'd built too tight. Her doctor had given her something to help. I don't know the name of it. I've looked it up since. There's a specific class of sleep medication that can trigger or worsen a parasomnia in people who have any history of one. The dosage matters. The sleep environment matters. Stress matters. She had all 3 conditions at once. We didn't know any of this. We knew that our roommate had been standing over my bed at 2 a.m. with a kitchen knife and did not remember doing it. That was what we had to work with. We didn't sleep again that night. All 3 of us sat up until 6:30 and talked about it in the careful, measured tones of people trying very hard to be rational about something that had not been rational. Madison cried. She was frightened in a way that was different from the way I was frightened. She wasn't frightened of what might have happened. She was frightened of herself, of the gap, of the things she'd done in the time between closing her eyes and opening them when I said her name. By 9 a.m, we had decided she should move rooms. Not because she was dangerous, we didn't use that word, but because everyone would feel better with her in a single room where she wasn't going to wander somewhere and wake up holding something sharp. The RA on our floor, Priya, helped with the paperwork. Madison moved out the following afternoon. She took her bedding and her laundry hamper and her 3 succulents, and she moved to room 412, 1 floor up. A single. Her new neighbor had gone home for a long weekend. Before she left, she hugged me for a long time. She said she was sorry. I said she didn't need to be sorry. She said she was going to see someone about it, a sleep specialist. She'd already made the appointment. I said that was good. Then she went upstairs. That was 2 days before the watermelon. 1 day before Sophia. I didn't know about Sophia until the next morning. The morning of the watermelon. The morning after we'd all sat in the dark and not spoken. I got up, I showered, I ate breakfast, I went to my 9 o'clock lecture on macroeconomics and sat in the 3rd row and wrote down everything the professor said without retaining a single word of it. Somewhere in the back of my skull, underneath the professor's voice and the scratch of my own pen, something was turning slowly. Not forming yet, just turning. The announcement came through on the university's emergency notification system at 2:47 that afternoon. I was in the campus quad, walking back from the library, and my phone vibrated, and I read the message and I stopped walking. A female student had been found unresponsive in her dormitory room that morning. She had been transported to the hospital. Her condition was critical. The investigation was ongoing. The dormitory was our dormitory. The floor was the 4th floor. I stood in the quad for a while after that. The sun was at that angle it gets in late November, where it's low and orange, and the shadows are very long and everything looks slightly more serious than it is. Students moved around me. Someone on a bike almost hit me. I kept reading the notification. 4th floor, her room, investigation. I went back to the dormitory. Riley was already in the room. She'd heard the same thing. She'd been sitting on the edge of her bunk for some time, I could tell. The way you can tell when someone has been very still for too long. She looked at me when I came in, and neither of us said what we were both thinking. We didn't say it because there was nothing to say. We had a roommate who had sleepwalked with a knife 3 nights ago. She had moved to the 4th floor. Something had happened on the 4th floor. These were 3 facts that existed in sequence and proximity, and that was all they were, and we were going to treat them that way until we had a reason to do otherwise. Jessica came home at 5 and we told her about the notification, and she turned on her laptop and found the university's statement online. More of the same, more careful language, no name, investigation ongoing, building security enhanced. She said, "Did they say how?" We said no. She said, "Do they know who?" We said no. She closed the laptop. The 3 of us ate dining hall food in near silence and went back to the room and did our various homework and went to bed at different times without discussing it. The radiator came on. The elevator ran twice, somewhere above us. I noted this and filed it and did not assign it any weight at all, consciously. Footsteps. A door. The usual sounds of a building full of people. The usual sounds. At 2 in the morning, the door opened and Madison walked in with the watermelon. After Madison left that night, the 3 of us sat in the dark and the quiet for a long time. The plastic container was still on the floor. None of us had moved it. Nobody had touched it. Jessica said, "She seemed okay." Riley said, "She seemed awake." I said, "She was awake." There was a pause. Riley said, "What do you mean she was awake, as opposed to?" I said, 3 nights ago, she wasn't." Another pause. Longer. Jessica said she was going to bed. She got in her bunk and faced the wall, and her breathing didn't slow for a long time, but she kept her face to the wall and none of us said anything else. Riley climbed back up to the top bunk. She didn't say goodnight. She just pulled her blanket up and went still. I lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling. Okay, think. Madison had been awake tonight. Awake and smiling and carrying fruit and confused about why we were scared. She had come to bring her old roommates something in the middle of the night, and she had not known why that might be alarming, and she had understood it immediately when she saw us, and her face had done the thing it did, and she'd left. She had walked to our room from her new room on the 4th floor, down 1 flight, a normal route, and she had been awake the entire time. Except, what time did she leave her room? What route did she take to get here? I picked up my phone. It was 2:23 in the morning. I opened the emergency notification again. Critical condition, 4th floor, our building. The victim's room, wherever it was exactly, whichever room on the 4th floor. My thumbs sat over the screen for a moment. The 4th floor was directly above us. Same layout, same corner orientation. Room 412, where Madison was now, was 1 floor directly above our room. The room above ours was a single on the 4th floor. Our window faced east, toward the old oak tree. I opened Google Maps, pulled up the satellite view of the building, rotated it east. And there it was. I had seen it when we moved in last fall, the way you see architectural details on old buildings. Once, briefly, the way you notice a gargoyle or a cornice. The stone ledge, running horizontally across the entire eastern facade at each floor level. An aesthetic detail. purely decorative. About 18 inches wide, maybe less in some places, running from the northeast corner all the way across. I zoomed in. I looked at it for a long time. The ledge at the 4th floor level was directly accessible from a window. The ledge at the 3rd floor level was directly accessible from our window. Between the building's northeast corner and the campus maintenance road, there was a narrow strip of landscaping. Functional, forgotten. An oak tree 15 feet from the corner, its larger branches extending toward the 3rd floor. I put my phone face down on the mattress. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs to stop them from shaking. I kept them there for 10 seconds. Then I picked the phone up again. I want to tell you I went to sleep after that. I did not go to sleep. I lay in the dark doing the thing I do where I build an explanation and test it, and take it apart and rebuild it. The explanation I built was this. Madison had walked downstairs the normal way and brought us watermelon because she wanted to do something nice, and she'd been awake, and that was the whole thing. The ledge was irrelevant. The ledge was a detail. Old buildings have ledges. The satellite view showed me a ledge, and I had applied it to a situation because I was frightened, and frightened people see patterns. That explanation lasted about 40 minutes. What broke it was something small, a memory from earlier that night, during the 15 seconds between the door opening and Madison setting the container down. She had been wearing her hoodie, the heather gray one, but her feet. She had been wearing shoes. You don't put on shoes to walk down one flight of stairs in a dormitory at 2 in the morning to bring someone watermelon. You wear slippers, you wear sandals, you go barefoot. I had noticed her feet and not processed it, and now I was processing it, and the explanation I had built was starting to show cracks, and I was patching the cracks as fast as they appeared, and I could feel the speed of the patching, and I knew what that speed meant. At 4:40, I gave up pretending. At 5, I put on my own shoes and went outside. The east side of the building at 5 in the morning is not a place anyone goes. The maintenance road runs along it, a single lane of crumbled asphalt, and on the building side, there's a strip of landscaping that's basically just a place where grass grew because nobody told it not to. It's not visible from the quad, not visible from the main entrance. There are no security cameras along this side because there's nothing here. No entry points, no bike racks, nowhere to loiter. I stood at the corner of the building in the November dark with my phone's flashlight, and I looked at the ledge. It was narrower up close than it had looked on the satellite view. Stone, weathered, with a surface of grayed moss in patches. The 3rd floor level began about 12 feet above my head. I looked at it. Then I turned on the flashlight, and I looked at the ground beneath it. The soil at the base of the building was soft from recent rain. Not muddy, not saturated, but soft enough. And there were impressions in it. 2 small, oval, regular. Maybe a shoe, maybe not. I crouched down and looked at them for a long time in the flashlight's beam, and I didn't touch them. I stood up and looked at the ledge again, where the moss grew, on the section of ledge that ran from the 3rd floor window access point toward the northeast corner. The moss was slightly compressed, not foot-shaped, just pressed. Still slightly pressed, not fully sprung back. Rubber soles on wet moss compress and release slowly. It had not released yet. And one more thing. On the bark of the oak tree, on the section of trunk at approximately the 2nd floor roof line, there was a fresh scrape. Light wood visible through the gray outer bark in a diagonal line, the kind of line that happens when something sharp and hard makes sudden contact at an angle. A shoe heel. Climbing. I took photographs of all of it. I took them methodically, each thing from multiple angles, close up and then wide, then my hand in frame for scale. My hands had stopped shaking. When I'm scared in the ambulatory kind of way, the kind where there's something to do, they stop. It's the lying still kind that keeps them shaking. When I had everything I could get, I stood back. Scuff marks on a ledge, compressed moss, a scrape on a tree, impressions in soft soil. That was what I had. I stood there in the cold and thought about what that actually added up to, and I made myself be honest about the answer. A defense attorney could dismantle this in 45 seconds. Scuff marks on a ledge, in a building full of students, on a surface that had been there for decades. I had nothing that put a specific person on that ledge, Nothing that connected the ledge to the fourth floor. Nothing that connected anything to Madison except timing and a history that was itself not fully understood. I had fear wearing the costume of logic, and I needed to be very careful about the difference. I needed more. I needed something unambiguous. The only person I knew who could tell me what unambiguous looked like, in precise legal terms, at 5:15 in the morning, was Priya. Room 408 was at the end of the hall. I climbed the stairs back to the third floor. The hallway was quiet. One light on somewhere at the far end, the exit sign over the stairwell at the other. Everything in between in that gray-blue dormitory dark. I walked to 408 and I knocked. It took a minute. Then the door opened. Priya is third-year pre-law, and she has been the RA on this floor since last January, and she runs her section with the specific efficiency of someone who has decided, early in life, that chaos is a resource allocation problem. She had clearly been asleep. She was wearing a gray tank top and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she was holding her phone, already on, already at the home screen, because she had heard the knock and started processing before she answered it. She looked at me. She looked at the mud on my shoes. She said, "How long?" I said 12 minutes. I said, "I know what time it is." She read something in my face. I don't know what exactly. Something that was not a normal 5 in the morning knock on a floor RA's door. She stepped aside and let me in. Her room was immaculate the way organized people's rooms are immaculate. Not tidy exactly, but arranged. Everything occupying a specific designated space. There was a whiteboard on the back of her door, covered in case outlines for her evidence law class, annotated in 3 different colors, the structure of it dense and logical and specific. I almost laughed. I stopped myself because laughing would have taken time I didn't have, and also because it wasn't funny exactly. It was just notable. She cleared a sweater off her desk chair and pointed at it. She sat on the edge of her bed and picked up a legal pad and a pen. She did not ask me to start from the beginning. She just looked at me. So I started from the beginning. The knife, 3 nights ago. The decision to move Madison. The announcement yesterday afternoon. The watermelon at 2 in the morning. The shoes. The satellite view. The ledge. I talked for 12 minutes, maybe 14. Priya took notes in the way she takes notes. Not full sentences, just anchor points, written fast. Madison. Knife. New med. 412. Ledge. Eastern facade. Floor levels. Shoe. 2 a.m. Aware. Photos. Moss. Scrape. She did not interrupt me once. When I finished, she looked at her legal pad for a moment. Then she looked at me. She said, "You haven't gone to the police with scuff marks on a ledge and a roommate who sleepwalks?" "No." "Smart." I said, "I know it's not enough." She said, "It is not enough on its own. You need something that is not ambiguous, physical evidence specific to her. Not the ledge, her." I said, "Her shoes. She was wearing shoes at 2 in the morning." Priya said, "Her shoes are in her room." A pause. I said, "Her new room, on the 4th floor, which is a crime scene probably by now." Priya looked at her legal pad. She tapped the pen against it twice. She said, "I called campus security at 9:15 last night, after the notification. I filed a verbal report and told them I'd have a written follow-up this afternoon. I told them that a resident on my floor had recently moved to the 4th floor and had a documented history of sleepwalking and had been found in possession of a knife during a sleepwalking episode 3 nights ago. I told them the timing and the proximity needed to be considered." I looked at her. She said, "I do not speculate in reports. I document and I present, and I let the investigators draw conclusions from what I give them. I gave them what I had. What I did not have at 9:15 last night was the ledge, the photographs, and the shoes." She said, "I have them now." I'm going to make a second call at 8 this morning. The detective who's handling this is coming at noon. I want you to be here for that. Not to present, I'll present. You'll be here because you took the photographs and you're the one who can speak to the knife incident in the timeline. I said, "What about Madison?" Priya was quiet for a moment. She said, "What about Madison?" I said, "She doesn't know. Whatever happened, she doesn't know she did it. She came to bring us watermelon." She was smiling. Priya put the legal pad down. She said, "The question of what she knows and what she intended and what she's responsible for is not your question to carry. You understand that? There are systems for that question. Doctors, lawyers, courts, that is not your job. Your job is to give the investigators what you have so that they can do their job, which leads to those systems doing theirs." I said, "Okay." She said, "But you know that." I said, "I know that." She said, "And?" I didn't answer for a second. She said, "Emma, you're here at 5 in the morning with mud on your shoes. You have photographs. You've already made the decision. You just haven't said it out loud yet. Say it out loud." I said, "She needs help, not handcuffs. She needs someone who knows what's wrong with her and can make it stop happening." Priya said, "Yes, and you cannot give her that, but you can give the investigators what they need to find the rest of it themselves. That is the thing you can actually do." I looked at the evidence law whiteboard on her door. She said, "Go get 2 hours of sleep. I'll call you at 8. I went back to my room. Riley and Jessica were still asleep. The watermelon container was on the floor where Madison had left it. I stepped around it. I got in my bunk. I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling and thought about the shoes. Her shoes were in her room, the new room, 412. And if the investigators were already talking to campus security, then 412 was already in the conversation, and anything in it was going to be looked at. I did not need to go there. I was not going there. I had photographs. I had a timeline. I had Priya, who was already in the system, whose report was already filed, who would speak to a detective at noon, in the precise structured language that moves fastest in official settings. The gap between what I knew in my body and what I could put on a table was narrowing. Not closed yet, but narrowing. Priya called me at 8:02. I was already up. I had not slept. I had been lying very still in a way that was not sleeping, and I had become aware, around 6:30, that I was listening to the building again. The elevator, the hallway, the sounds from the floor above. No footsteps above me since 2 in the morning. Priya said, "The detective is confirmed for noon." She said, "I need you here at 10 so we can go through what you have before he arrives." I said, "Something else." She said, "Tell me." I said, "She was wearing shoes at 2 in the morning, but she might have cleaned up. If she came back inside through the window, if she was carrying debris from the tree or the ledge on her clothes, she might have." Priya said, "She would clean up if she knew she needed to." I said, "Right." Priya said, 10 o'clock, room 408. At 10:07, I was sitting across from Priya's desk and she was looking at the photographs on my phone. Screen at maximum brightness, going through each one twice. She zoomed in, she zoomed back out. She was very still in the way she is still when she's processing. She said, "The moss compression is clear." She said, "The scrape on the bark is clear." She said, "These are the impressions in the soil?" I said yes. She said, "The heel shape is visible in the second image, not the first." She put the phone down. She said, "This establishes use of the ledge. It does not establish when, and it does not establish who. On its own, it is suggestive. In combination with a documented sleepwalking incident, a moved resident, a specific timeline, it is much more than suggestive. It is the thing that makes everything else cohere." She picked up her legal pad. She said, "The detective's name is Hennessy. He is thorough and he listens, and he does not get territorial about information that comes from outside his investigation, as long as it's presented cleanly. Present clean, no theories, only what you observed and when and how you documented it. I said, and the shoes. Priya was quiet for a moment. She said, I can speak to the shoes as part of my RA report. The resident was observed returning to the building at approximately 2 in the morning wearing closed-toe shoes. It is anomalous. It is in the report. If the shoes are in that room, the investigators will find them when they execute the search. I said, the bark debris. She said, what? I said, if she climbed the tree in the dark, she'd have picked up bark on her shoes, on her clothes, possibly her hands. She can't clean her shoes if she doesn't know she needs to. She doesn't know she needs to. Priya looked at me. A beat. Then, right. Go on. I said, she might have tried to wash her hands at some point during the night. Normal thing to do before bed. But bark debris in a nail bed is hard to get completely. If she scrubbed her hands, she'd have soap residue, and she'd have missed the nails. That's not something she'd think to check. Priya wrote something on the legal pad. She said, you're not going to say any of this to the detective. I said, I know. She said, because it is a theory, and the detective does not need your theories. He needs your photographs and your timeline and your direct observations. That is it. The rest is his to find. I said, I know, Priya. She said, I know you know. I'm saying it for the record. At 5 past noon, Detective Hennessy arrived at room 408. He was maybe 50, medium height, carrying a small notebook and a coffee cup. He looked at Priya's evidence law whiteboard with an expression that was almost a smile. He sat in the desk chair and he listened. Priya presented for the first 9 minutes. She did it the way she does everything. Anchored, sequential, no filler. She presented the knife incident. She presented the RA report she'd filed. She presented the timeline of Madison's move to room 412. She presented Madison's 2 in the morning visit to our room as documented behavioral evidence of a nocturnal episode. And she presented my photographs. He went through the photographs on her phone. She transferred them. He went through each one the same way she had, twice, slowly. He wrote in his notebook. Not much, just anchor points. Then he looked at me. He asked me to describe the knife incident in my own words. I described it. He asked me what I had observed about Madison's eyes during that incident. I told him. Flat affect, unfocused tracking, no response to name until the third call and physical contact. He wrote. He asked me what I had observed about Madison's footwear at 2 in the morning. I told him. Closed-toe shoes, untied. The kind you put on in a hurry in the dark. He asked me what I had observed about Madison's behavior and affect during the 2 in the morning visit. I told him. Fully awake, appropriate responses, genuine confusion about our reaction, appropriate distress when she understood the room's state. No evidence of a dissociative episode at that time. He wrote. He looked at Priya. He said, the shoes are currently in room 412, which is part of the active scene. He said, the information about the ledge and the tree will be incorporated into the physical evidence collection. He said, the resident. Do either of you have contact with her since she moved to 412? I said, she came to our room at 2 this morning. He said, and since? I said, not since. He looked at his notebook. He said, the resident has not been contacted by our investigators yet. That will happen today. He said, I want to ask you something directly and I want a direct answer. I said, okay. He said, in your assessment, is this person a flight risk? I looked at him. He said, I'm not asking you to make a legal determination. I'm asking you whether, based on your direct observation over several months, you believe this person is aware of what happened and has the capacity and intent to leave before investigators reach her. I thought about Madison setting the watermelon container on the floor, her hands over her mouth, the specific quality of her confusion, not the confusion of someone navigating a story they've prepared, but the confusion of someone genuinely encountering something they cannot locate themselves within. I said, no, she doesn't know. She genuinely does not know. He looked at me for a moment, Something shifted slightly in his face. Not pity exactly, something more practical than that. Something that acknowledged the weight of the sentence I had just said and moved past it because there was work to do. He said, "Thank you." He said this to both of us. He stood up and picked up his notebook and his coffee cup. He said, "Evidence handled right puts people where they need to be." Then he left. Priya and I sat in the room for a moment after his footsteps faded down the hallway. She said, "Go eat something. You haven't eaten." I said, "Are you?" She said, "I'm going to write up the full report and I'll file it this afternoon. Go eat. Come back here at 4 and I'll tell you what I know by then." I went to the dining hall. I got a tray of food. I sat at a table by the window and ate about half of it and watched people walk across the quad. Normal Tuesday. The sun still at that low November angle, the shadows long. Everyone bundled in November coats moving between buildings on schedules they'd built for themselves over the course of the semester. A girl on the path near the library was laughing at something on her phone. Two guys were throwing a frisbee on the far end of the quad, even though it was probably 40 degrees. At 3:15, the building-wide alert went through. This one was different. This one said that a person of interest had been identified in connection with the incident, and that investigators were conducting interviews on the 4th floor. It said that residents of the building should remain available, and that additional information would be provided. Person of interest. I put my phone in my jacket pocket and walked back. I went to my room first. Riley was there. She was sitting on her bunk with her laptop open and not looking at it. She looked up when I came in. She said, "Did you hear?" I said yes. She said, "Emma." I said yeah. She said, "I need to know if you know something." I looked at her. Riley is not someone who asks questions she doesn't already have partial answers to. She'd gotten there on her own. Maybe not all the way, but close. I sat on my bunk across from her. I said, "I went to Priya this morning, early. I told her what I had and she filed a report and a detective came at noon." Riley was quiet. I said, "I had photographs of the ledge, on the east side of the building, and I had the timeline." She said nothing. I said, "She was wearing shoes, Riley. When she came at 2 in the morning, you don't wear shoes to walk down one flight to bring someone fruit." She said, "The ledge runs to the 4th floor." I said, "Yes." She was quiet for another moment. Not processing. She'd already processed, I could see that. The way she goes still when the decision has been made and everything after it is execution. She was absorbing something else. The shape of what it meant. She said, "She didn't know she did it." I said, "No, she doesn't know." Riley said, how can you?" I said, "Because she walked into this room with watermelon. Because she was smiling. Because when she saw us, she had no idea what she'd done to cause that reaction. She wasn't performing. She was confused." Riley was very still. She said, "The knife. 3 nights ago. She didn't know she did that either." I said, "No." She said, "So she's been... for how long?" I said, "We don't know. Probably since the medication. Probably since she moved in here. The disruption to her sleep, the new environment. We don't know how many nights." I did not go on from there. The implication was already in the room, and neither of us needed to say it. Riley looked at the floor. Then she said, "Is she going to be okay?" And that was the first time in the entire time I have known Riley that she has asked me a question she does not have an answer to. Not a rhetorical one. Not a setup for a point she already has. A real question. The kind you ask when you genuinely don't know and you're afraid of the answer. I said, "I think she's going to get help. That's what I think." Riley nodded. She looked at the wall for a while. Then she looked back at her laptop without opening anything new. I went to Priya at 4. At 4, the hallway on the 4th floor was a different place than it had been at noon. Campus security stationed near the elevator. Investigators, I didn't know if they were campus or county, moving in and out of rooms. The door to 412 was open. I didn't look. I walked past it. Priya's room was the same. Legal pad, whiteboard. The efficiency of someone who has been managing this kind of information for hours and has not let it become chaotic. She looked at me when I sat down. She said, "The shoes." I said, "And?" She said, "Bark transfer on the left toe cap, inner edge of the right sole. The soil impressions under the ledge match the heel profile of the left shoe. There is also, she paused, glanced at her legal pad, compacted soil under 3 fingernails on her right hand. She scrubbed her hands at some point during the night. Soap residue still in the creases. Missed the nails. She didn't know she needed to clean them, because she hadn't been there. Not consciously. Priya said. The detective also found, in 412, the chef's knife from the original incident. Do you remember where that went? I thought back. After the knife incident, after we'd all sat up until 6 in the morning. At some point, someone had put the knife somewhere. I hadn't tracked it. I hadn't thought about it. Priya said, it was in her bag, the duffel she'd packed for the move. At the bottom, wrapped in a t-shirt. She carried it with her when she moved. The room was quiet. She didn't know that either. She put it there in her sleep and took it with her, because in whatever internal landscape she was moving through at night, it was hers to carry. Priya said, you can go. Nothing else is needed from you tonight. The investigators have what they need, and I'll be available here if anything else comes up. She looked at her legal pad. She said, you did the right thing. You did it cleanly. I said, it doesn't feel clean. She said, it rarely does. That's not the measure. I went back downstairs. Here is the part I haven't told you yet. The part that comes after the detective and before the thing with Madison's message. The part where I sat in my room alone. Riley had gone to track practice. She told me later she needed to run. Just run. And I understood that completely. And Jessica wasn't back from class, and the room was just mine for an hour. The watermelon container was still on the floor where Madison had left it at 2 in the morning. The lid was still on. The pieces were still inside, maybe slightly less red than they'd been, starting to weep a little juice in the way cut watermelon does after a few hours. I sat on my bunk and looked at it. Above me, somewhere through the ceiling, through my ceiling, through the floor above me, somewhere in the specific geometry of room 412, Madison was sitting across from a detective, trying to explain what she remembered from last night. The watermelon, she would be saying. She'd woken up and she couldn't sleep, and there was watermelon in the fridge she'd bought a few days ago. She'd wanted to do something nice for her old roommates. She'd cut it up and she'd gone downstairs. She would be explaining the look on our faces. She would be explaining why we were arranged in the room the way we were. She would be confused. She would be answering questions she didn't understand the shape of. And at some point, the detective would ask her about the ledge. I didn't know what that conversation looked like. I still don't, really. I know that at some point in that conversation, Madison understood that something had happened. Not what she had done, not precisely, but that something had happened and that she was connected to it in a way she could not account for. And that the inability to account for it was not going to be enough. I sat in my room with the watermelon on the floor, and I thought about what the detective had said. Evidence handled right puts people where they need to be. And I thought about where Madison needed to be. Not a cell, not a sentence. Somewhere with people who understood what was happening in her brain when she closed her eyes, who could name it, who could adjust the medication and build the structure and monitor the episodes, and give her a way to live that wasn't this. A room that locked from the outside when she slept. I don't know if I know how that sounds, but it's what she needed, and it's what the system, if it worked the way it was supposed to work, would eventually provide. And Sophia, who had been a freshman who hadn't finished her first semester, whose roommate had gone home for the weekend, whose window had not been fully latched because why would you fully latch a window on the 4th floor of a brick building in November? There's nothing up there. It's a detail you wouldn't think to check. Sophia was in a hospital. I didn't know her condition. I didn't know her face. I knew her floor and her room number and the fact that she had been there alone, and that was all I knew. There are things you can hold at a distance while you are working, while you are outside at 5 in the morning taking photographs, while you are in Priya's room presenting a timeline, while you are sitting in front of a detective keeping your answers to direct observations only. There is a version of you that can do all of that and feel something sharp and remote at the same time, like a sound from another room. Then the work is done, and you are alone, and the sharpness moves into the room with you, and it is not remote at all. The truth of this situation and the tragedy of this situation were the exact same thing. They didn't sit on opposite sides of a scale. They were the same object. Madison had been walking through a watermelon field in her grandfather's land, looking for one that was right. That was where she was. That was the entirety of what was true for her. And she had also done something that could not be undone. I held both of those at the same time for a while, and then my phone buzzed. Madison. I looked at the screen for a moment before I opened it. She said, "I think I need help." She said, "I'm scared." 2 messages, sent one after the other, 30 seconds apart. The second one already visible below the first. I want to tell you there was a calculation involved. There wasn't. Or if there was, it happened too fast for me to track it. What I felt was, she was scared. She was sitting somewhere on the 4th floor with the shape of something she couldn't fully see, pressing in around her. And she was scared in the way you're scared when things are happening around you that no one will explain. She didn't know the whole truth yet. She knew something was wrong, and she knew it involved her, and she was reaching for someone she trusted. I typed 3 words. "We know. It's okay." I hit send before I could take it apart, before I could examine whether it was the right thing to say, or what message it sent, or what she would understand by it. "We know it's okay," which meant, you are not alone with this, which meant, the people you came to at 2 in the morning with watermelon are still here, which meant, you need help, and help is coming, and we know that, and it is, in the specific limited sense that anything at all can be okay. Both things at the same time. The evidence I had spent the night gathering, and the 3 words I had just sent. I put my phone face down on the mattress. The watermelon was still on the floor. Over the next 2 weeks, the shape of what had happened became clear in the way these things become clear. In pieces, not all at once, some pieces arriving officially through the university, and some arriving sideways through hallway conversations, and one arriving directly through a letter. Madison's parents drove up the morning after the detective's visit. I know this because I saw them from the window. Her mother in the parking lot, one hand holding her own face, standing very still in the specific stillness of someone who cannot process the information they have been given. Her father standing straight beside her, the way people stand when they are trying not to collapse in public. A lawyer arrived that afternoon, then a psychiatrist. Then Madison was moved to the campus medical center for observation. The official communications described it as a housing and health matter, and gave very little else. There was no announcement of a name. The building community was told that the resident had been connected to the incident and was receiving medical care, and that the investigation was ongoing. Sophia lived. I found this out 4 days after, through a residence hall communication that said she had been transferred to a rehabilitation facility. I read the word rehabilitation and sat with it for a long time. It can mean many things. I did not know which thing it meant here. I still don't, entirely. Her family filed a civil suit against the university, not against Madison, against the university, whose housing office had been notified in writing of Madison's sleepwalking history and her knife episode, and had assigned it a category and read it and let it sit. The RA report had been filed. It was in the system. It existed. Someone had opened it and classified it, and the classification had not triggered any further action. The gap between knowing something and doing something is where most of the real tragedies live. The gap was not Priya. Priya had done everything right. The gap was somewhere higher up, in some office somewhere, where a report about a girl with a knife became a low-priority item because no one had been hurt yet. I think about that a lot. The yet. The way certain gaps stay open because nothing has fallen through them recently. Madison was not charged with murder. I want to be precise about this because the categories matter. She was the subject of a legal proceeding that determined, after extensive psychiatric evaluation, that she had acted without awareness or intent during a severe parasomnia episode. The legal outcome placed her under long-term involuntary psychiatric treatment, supervised care indefinitely, with specific conditions around her living situation and the management of her sleep disorder. The shape of the life she had been building, the major she was halfway through, the summer internship she had applied for, The specific forward momentum of a 20-year-old who is still becoming something. That shape stopped. It became a different shape, one built around management and monitoring, and the slow, careful process of finding a medication and a structure that would keep the part of her that walked in the dark from walking in the dark anymore. Her grandmother's watermelon field. I think about that sometimes too. Whether she still goes there. Whether the field has gone quiet. Whether sleep, for her now, is just sleep. The message came 4 months after the conclusion of the legal proceedings. She said she knew I had been the one to raise the concern formally. I don't know how she knew. Maybe Priya told her. Maybe the investigators had noted it. Maybe she just figured it out. She said she did not know how to feel about that. She said she needed to say it anyway. She said, "Thank you. I know that sounds insane, but if you hadn't done what you did when you did, I might have done it again, and I wouldn't have known. I would have kept not knowing." I read that a few times. The specific horror of it, not the legal outcome, not the treatment, not even Sophia. The horror of continuing not to know. Of walking through a field every night thinking you were looking for something that was ready, while somewhere in the waking world, you were doing something you could not have imagined doing. The not knowing being its own kind of damage, separate from everything else. I wrote back, "I'm sorry it happened. I'm sorry about Sophia. I'm sorry about all of it." She replied, "Me too. Every single day." After that, we didn't write again. Riley asked me once, a few weeks after everything settled, whether I thought we did the right thing. She was pulling her track bag out from under the bunk when she asked it, not looking at me, which is how Riley asks things she's actually uncertain about. I thought about it for a moment. I said, "I think we did the necessary thing. I'm not sure the right thing and the necessary thing are always the same." She stopped pulling at the bag and looked at me. She said, "Is that a difference?" I said, "I think it might be, sometimes. I think sometimes the necessary thing is the right thing, and it's still going to cost something that doesn't come back." She was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled the bag out the rest of the way and slung it over her shoulder and said, "Okay." That was the conversation we had. The watermelon container sat on the floor of our room for 3 days after that night. None of us moved it. Nobody talked about it. Then one morning, I came back from class, and it was gone. Jessica, I think, had quietly dealt with it, and we never discussed it. There's one thing I still don't know. I've decided not to look into it. I made the decision deliberately, at a specific moment, sitting in the dining hall about 2 months after everything ended, and I've kept it since. Sophia was alone in that room because her roommates had gone home for the weekend. She was sleeping. Whatever the night looked like from inside it, from her perspective, in whatever state she was in when it happened, I don't know. Whether she was peaceful, whether she had been dreaming something good, whether she had any awareness at all of what was happening, or whether sleep was simply the last thing she was doing, and then something else entirely began without her. I don't know. I could probably find out some version of it. There are ways. Medical records, if she chose to share them. The family, if they were willing to speak. The investigator's account. But I have decided that this particular piece of information is not mine to have. Some things you don't pursue. Not because the truth doesn't exist, but because the pursuing of it is a transaction, and the thing you'd be using as currency is a young woman's most private moment, and that transaction is not one I'm willing to make to satisfy something that is, at its root, my own need to know that she was okay when she wasn't. She wasn't okay. That's what I know. That's what I hold. The watermelon, I don't buy it anymore. There's no specific dramatic reason for that. It's just, I'm standing in a grocery store and there it is, stacked at the end of the produce section, and I move to the next thing. Every time. Without deciding to. The particular redness of it, the way it sits there, honest and bright, in its own context, waiting for someone to think of it as a simple thing. I don't buy it, that's all. Some things just change shape without asking permission, and you learn to work around the new shape of them, and eventually that becomes the normal.